Welcome to the DaVinci Hour podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Maxwell Cooper, and in this podcast series, I interview physicians, medical innovators, and entrepreneurs making an impact on healthcare. This podcast is produced by DaVinci Academy, a multimedia medical education company that provides podcasts, video courses, and digital textbooks. You can see more on our website, www.dviacademy.com, and our YouTube channel, youtube.com/c/DaVinci Academy Med. This podcast is sponsored by Doc2Doc, the personal lending platform designed for doctors by doctors. Do you have some big expenses in the near future? Maybe you're moving, applying to residency or fellowship, fixing up your car or home, or starting a new practice. Doc2Doc believes that traditional lenders overestimate the risk of lending money to doctors, residents, and medical students, focusing too much on the challenges of their financial past and giving them insufficient credit for the promise of their financial future. Check out Doc2Doc's personal loan options at doc2doclending.com/DaVinci. Hey everybody, welcome back to the DaVinci Hour podcast. I'm honored this week to be joined by Austin Poole, who is a partner at a venture capital firm here in Atlanta, actually, BIP Venture Partners. So Austin, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Yeah, pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Awesome. So maybe I gave you a very brief intro. Maybe give us a little bit of background on how you got to where you are today, what kind of experience you had, and what kind of led to your current role.
Yeah, no, so my background's primarily on the finance and investing side. Got my start on the investing side, running a quantitative trading strategy ways back. And that's really what kind of whetted my appetite in terms of investing as a profession. And then from there, it kind of went down a couple of different paths. I spent some time at a early stage technology company on the sales and business development role, and that's actually how I originally came in contact with BIP. They were the primary investor in that business, and I met the founding partner here through the board function there. Ultimately went back into the financial services side and spent some time at a proprietary credit shop where we put together specialized debt products for private equity roll-ups and such. Ultimately, that got a little repetitive and tiring, and it's not fun to strap businesses down with onerous amounts of debt. It's much more fun building them, and so I was looking to get back onto that side of things, wanting to get back into growth and focusing on upside and kind of everybody partaking in that upside. And that led me kind of back either going down into the startup world or kind of taking on an investing role that focused on that end of the market. At that point in time, BIP was really trying to move from kind of this traditional kind of just fund kind of format into more of an institutional firm. I was actually supposed to be taking a role somewhere else, and I'd circled back to Mark, our founding partner here, Mark Buffington, and just to kind of circle back and say, hey, going to work with these guys, what do you think? That was supposed to be like a 15-minute, oh yeah, those guys are great, good luck. That turned into like a a couple-hour conversation about his vision for where he was taking BIP, and I was sold by the end of the call, and it was perfect. It was like the confluence of the two things I love, right? I really like the environment of an early stage business, but I really do love the investing side of things as well. And so we've grown from, I think we had maybe 7 folks at that point in time. We've got about, I think, 45 heads on our team now. And so the last 7 years have been a wild and chaotic ride. And so it's been funny because it does create moments in time where we can step into the shoes of some of the folks that we partner with, having gone through some of the growing pains in the last 4 or 5 years. But yeah, so that's kind of how I landed in the seat. I actually don't have a healthcare background. I've been focused on it for 7 years and find it morbidly interesting on a variety of ways. But yeah, that's how I landed here.
Yeah, that's really interesting that you kind of started yourself on the startup side of things and then kind of ended up on the investment side. I'm always curious, like, do you feel like that gives you a different, or I don't want to say better, but maybe like a unique perspective versus someone who just maybe rose up just purely on the investment side of things? And I guess if so, how so?
So just to be clear, I'd say most of my professional experience has been on the investing side.
Oh,
The
okay.
time I spent with that technology company was, it's small relative to the time I've spent on the investing side. So I don't want to misrepresent myself there. And so it's a really common question, right? Like this background versus that background, right?
Sure, sure.
Um, I think there's gives and takes on both. I think, former operators definitely they're going to have the experience of having experienced a lot of the emotions, and kind of the sticky, not so great people stuff, right? That you go through in an early business, and when you're staring your cash out date 13 weeks out, like, so that there's definitely a level of understanding of what the individual's going through that I definitely think they have. And then, usually somebody will have some sort of functional expertise, right, as an operator. And so they'll have that lens that kind of flip down. I always think of it as, different purviews, right? As to what something is, right? You're looking at an object, you're only seeing 15 degrees of that object, max. And it's completely biased based off of what your experiences are. And so, no, I would say my perspective definitely is more of someone that has spent their time on the investing side. I think, you know, don't have the level of, or the experience of having gone through, in the trenches, right? Day to day decision making. Um, but I think, to me, there's gives and takes on both sides of it. Somebody that's been investing, I think somebody that's good in investing is good at trying to step back and identify the bias that they have, um, because they're constantly walking into a situation where, like, they know, I'm making a hand gesture on a podcast, but they know, maybe 12 inches worth of information on, something that's 20 feet deep. And if, in my opinion, if you're good on the investing side, you got to keep that, like, very much in the forefront of of how you're looking at stuff, right? And really rely on kind of putting puzzle pieces together to try to help put together a picture of what you're dealing with.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Kind of um, knowing enough to essentially be dangerous, but also kind of knowing that limitation as well. That's an interesting point.
Yeah, it's right. It's knowing enough to be able to ask a question that could spark the answer in the person
Hmm.
that's actually gonna put it to work. That's the way. To me, if I can do that, that's where I feel like I'm, being helpful, or, helping things move forward. No investor, even if you've sat in the operating seat, for 30 years, no investor in a business is going to be able to solve a problem, right,
Hmm.
on a regular basis, right? You might be able to solve one, but that's because we're not in the trenches, right? And so, we're a mile high, which gives us visibility to everything that's kind of going on, right? So we kind of get that market perspective. But even if you're somebody that sat in the seat before, you're not sitting in that seat right now.
Right. Right.
And I think anybody that's investing, regardless of background, has to keep that very much at the forefront of, how they're viewing the world or that particular problem.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, especially about from the operator perspective that you're not the operator anymore. I think that's an interesting point. So I guess along the lines of healthcare, what type of investments are you like focused on, or are you most excited about? And I guess how do you go about picking? Like, how do I'm sure I can't imagine how many ideas and business plans you get sent. Like, I guess how do you pick your the ones you go with?
Yeah, no, I think somebody was just asking us the other day. I think me and my team will meet, like, sit down for like a 30 plus minute call on average, we're doing about 400 meetings a year. Um,
Wow.
and but back to your question, you know, so I'll start broad. We kind of bucket, healthcare is huge, right? I mean, U.S. healthcare systems, like I haven't looked this up in probably like 4 or 5 years, but it's got to be, a top 20 economy in the world, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, just our healthcare sector. Um, and so we break it into kind of three broad silos first. So healthcare IT, which is pure software, or maybe it's a communications platform or data analytics platform, but something with software margins, and could be a clinical workflow, administrative workflow, like I said, data analytics platform, et cetera. And then tech-enabled services. So our firm, we're not the group that's gonna necessarily go like try to buy a bunch of, dental practices, or that's not really our shtick. But we do like tech-enabled services, right? The healthcare IT market is, again, maybe, X big. The healthcare services market is, 100, 1,000X, whatever the healthcare IT, because, if you're selling if you're selling software, right, there's only so many healthcare organizations to buy it from you. Whereas the services that are rendered, it's, probably 4 or 5 in healthcare services every year, right? So tech-enabled services for us, we're looking for, groups that are coming up with, kind of novel care delivery models, care coordination, stuff of that nature. Or maybe it is kind of an IT solution, but it has kind of like a services wrapper around it. I'm a big believer that, healthcare at its core is human. And in order to get somebody to engage, like there has to be some sort of human element to it. So tech-enabled services in the last vertical, or the last kind of, the way we chunk it out, is pharma services. We don't invest in molecules or devices, but we're really interested in kind of the stakeholders in the ecosystems around the development, research, distribution, and commercialization of those therapies and devices. And so that's kind of at the highest, most level, kind of the big buckets we look at.
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess a quick question I'm curious from your standpoint is like, I feel like there's certain healthcare companies that are probably not a good fit for venture capital money, like a early stage device or drug company. Would you? I've heard other people say things like that. Would you agree with that? Or there, like, I guess, just because of the funding cycle and things like that?
Yeah. So I think it just depends. So like, you know, our healthcare for us it's our largest vertical for a whole firm, but we invest outside healthcare too. The overarching, what fits in our bucket is B2B software and tech-enabled services, right? And so that is why like a device or a molecule is not really a good fit for us. It's because we're focused on a business model. Um,
Gotcha.
and there are absolutely venture capital firms, and unfortunately I couldn't give you like a long list because we don't interact with them a ton, but I know that there's a fair number of them out there. There are funds that invest in molecules and devices. They specialize in it, right?
Hmm.
Which I feel like you have to,
Hmm.
to understand, like you said, the funding cycles that are required, the regulatory around it, distribution after you get through regulatory. Like that's like a whole nother ball of wax, that I couldn't begin to unpack. There's plenty of fat to chew on with, regular old healthcare services and technology. Um, but that's definitely out there. I will say, stuff that's not a fit for venture capital funding, right? Venture capital is kind of based around this concept of like, very high and persistent growth rates, right?
Hmm.
There are certain business models that don't fit that. The one that, the thing that a lot of people look to is like gross margin, right? Is one of the indicators of like, is this business something that could be, really benefit from venture capital, which all venture capital is capital that, it's basically capital that allows you to grow the way your balance sheet wouldn't let you.
Hmm.
Uh, Now, in the last 3 years, it's gotten perverted into like something completely different sometimes, where it's like, it's constant transfusions of cash to keep the patient alive on the table. because
Right.
that's a business model that works. We've seen a little bit of that, but at its core, that's what it's supposed to be, right? You have a business model that allows for really high investment in sales and marketing because you have 80-90% gross margins. If you're talking about software, that means 90% of every dollar of what you sell falls through to your operating expenses, which could be reinvested in sales and marketing, could be reinvested in further product development. And that's why those business models tend to attract venture capital, is because it kind of creates this like flywheel effect of the more you sell, the more you can sell.
Sure.
Um, and so if you get the gross margins of a business, start to get below, 50%, it starts to get a little tougher, right? It's not to say it can't happen, but it'd be really hard to grow, a 20-25% pure services business at the rate required by a venture capital firm, just by the nature of you only get 25 cents of every dollar, and that has to cover sales, marketing. If you have a product, then in that case you probably wouldn't, but all
Hmm.
your back office, right? If it's a labor-based service, right? That
Yeah.
goes into hiring, recruiting.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But yeah,
All the
that's generally it. It's like, what's the gross margin? Because that's going to tell you how much money can get reinvested in the business.
Sure, sure. No, that makes sense. I'm curious, and maybe you may want to give us, an example or two. Like, what are some companies, types of companies you've invested in recently that you feel like, if you're a firm and them, it was just kind of a, a home run or worked out really, really well. And I guess maybe if so, why?
So, ooh, um, that's a good question. So I can talk about a few things that we invest in first, and then
Sure,
what makes a good partnership for us second. So I'll forget that by the time I finish telling you about the businesses. So remind me.
sure.
Uh, but some stuff that we've done recently. And I'll talk more broadly, but the two things that are really big for me right now are access to care, with access being like purposely left and obtusely defined,
Yeah.
um, and care coordination. I'm a big believer that the level of medicine that's practiced in this country is ridiculously high. I don't care where you're looking. If you were to force rank all of our healthcare providers in the country, right? You could go down into the bottom quartile. They're practicing very high level of medicine, and so okay, if we still have these trends that we don't like, and the costs go up every year, and all the stuff that we hear, right? It is not the level. It's not the medicine that's being practiced. Like at least that's I mean, and I have an industrial and systems engineering background, and so I always kind of take this like systems approach to look at stuff.
Mhm.
It's not the medicine that's being practiced. I think it has a lot more to do with like when, where, how, who, and that part, right, is not medicine. That's a logistics, and
Mhm.
it's a business problem like any other industry has to solve. And so I like business models that are looking at, how do we further enable our healthcare providers, as opposed to like basically creating a new way of doing it or disintermediating. Like that to me is not, at best that's marginal gains, versus kind of the stuff that really gets me going is really moving the needle on things. So just to give you a couple businesses, there's a business that we partnered with about a little over 2 years ago now, up in Minneapolis, called Healthy Med. They're focused on the Medicaid special needs and waiver population. So these are folks that are usually dealing with like a debilitating health condition, but they're in that 18 to 64 age range primarily.
Sure.
So there's no dual eligible, where like, the reimbursement kind of gets bumped up. It's straight Medicaid, and because of the illnesses, and the conditions these folks are dealing with, they're not very mobile. So they don't really have a good way of accessing the healthcare system, in a brick and mortar type setting. The reimbursement's not great. So you're not going to get somebody to come out to them because it doesn't work.
Mhm.
I run a business doing that. And so they've come up with a really interesting kind of solution to really bring the healthcare system to these folks, but not in an acute manner. There's been a lot of talk about hospital at home. that's great. I think it definitely has a place, but like ideally, like, you don't want somebody to get to the acute setting. Like I mean, it should be our goal, is that things don't get to the point that they're acute. And
Hmm.
so they take, their approach is called clinic at home. The idea is basically just to tighten the feedback loop, right? That these
Sure.
folks have with the healthcare system, so that, the first time that we're seeing them in 6 months isn't, in the ER, or in a hospital, or, even worse, institutionalization. And so that I like that a lot, because there's not a lot of folks that are focused on straight Medicaid right now. The dual eligible population is getting a lot of attention, which I think is great, right?
Sure.
But that's an area. Then try to pick another one off the top of my head. We've got another business in our portfolio. This has been, I think we originally invested in 2015 or 2016, I think.
Oh, wow.
A company called Trella Health. And amazing story. Founder basically was like soliciting CMS to, provide him access to the, I think it's called the Chronic Disease Warehouse. It's basically this super large data set, of every claim that's run through Medicare. And he ended up building a software solution around that, to basically create kind of care path optimization, right? The idea that,
Hmm.
like, okay, so somebody presents into the, hospital some sort of condition, or they're in for a procedure maybe, um, and then they're getting discharged into the post-acute setting, right?
Hmm.
Well, like, the idea that, like, this home health provider isn't the exact same as home health A isn't the exact same as home health B, right?
Sure.
That was kind of like the simple premise initially. And so it's like, okay, hey, Austin just had, some sort of cardiac procedure. Okay, home health A has a, rehospitalization or readmission rate of X on somebody that has the profile of Austin. And then home health B has a rehospitalization or a readmission rate of X minus Y for that same condition. Right? Okay, I should send them to B, right?
Sure. Sure.
So basically, looking at how we can kind of optimize an individual's path through the system, recognizing that, you know, different folks and different organizations are going to do better with certain things, right? Not a crazy thought. At the it's, I wouldn't take my Subaru to the BMW or European mechanic, right?
Sure.
But yeah, so those are kind of two examples. And I'd say, where do we partner well, or who's a good fit for us? So we like to partner early, in a business's life cycle. Early for us, you'll hear a lot of people say, "Oh, where do we go early?" Early for us is, less than $10 million of software revenue, less than $25 million of services, and we'll go as early as you can go. I wouldn't say that we definitely are not a group that's doing a lot of, like, pre-revenue stuff by any means.
Sure.
Uh, have we done it? Yes. I can't say that we can't or that we won't, but it's not, it's the exception, not the rule. Generally speaking, we're more kind of focused on that kind of million to 5 million if it's software, maybe like 2 to 10 if it's services,
Hmm.
uh, where we feel like there's a concept that's showing signs, like kind of signs that are independently verifiable of product market fit, right? But we don't have a full business yet, right?
Sure.
We've got something that's been created that somebody's paying money for, because they're finding value in it, and that we love getting involved at that stage, right? And so from that point forward, right, it's kind of one, confirming that there is product market fit, and you've kind of hit the bullseye there, and then it's okay, great, folks want it. How are we going to get it in their hands, right? And so it's kind of more of like figuring out the go to market, right? Because a lot of times, you'll see a business built to, the single digit millions, basically on the back of, the founding team, just being scrappy and dynamic individuals. That doesn't scale though, right?
Sure.
If
Sure.
you're the only person that can sell your product or good, it's not a scalable business. Doesn't mean it's not a good business.
Right.
Just it's not one that's set up, to scale like, a venture capital investment kind of needs to, right, to be successful. So that's really like where we like to get involved for the first time. And then the way our capital base is set up, we can continue to be a capital partner all the way through a company's exit, right? We led a $200 million round for one of our companies last year.
Oh, wow.
Also wrote, a $1 million check at the beginning of this year, right?
Mm-hmm.
We don't do the later stuff in businesses that aren't already in our portfolio. We very much like to make sure we have a really good grip on, who our partners are. And, like I said, right, we're going to maybe get 12 inches of knowledge over our due diligence period. And, that continues to grow, especially the more we interact with the team, right, over that period of time. And as we get more comfort there, we can continue to, fund the business going forward. And that's really been a huge benefit to our portfolio companies. It's a little different. Most people will be like, oh, we're a seed fund or we're a Series A fund. And that's the way venture capital's kind of been set up. Not coming from the venture capital space, it never really made sense to me
Sure.
as an investor. It's like, okay, so you took the risk up front. Now that things are going really well, you're not going to continue to fund that business, or you're just going to do your pro rata. It's interesting, but it certainly works, right? There's a lot of funds that have made great returns doing that. But yeah, so that's we kind of view ourselves as longitudinal partners to the entrepreneurs and the management teams that we partner up with.
That's really cool. A couple of interesting things you made there is the one that like companies involved with. It sounds like you've been involved with a few companies that are kind of like wanting to be more like proactive healthcare rather than, the reactive healthcare. And I think, like our mutual connection, Ian over at Carew Health is, definitely, a big proponent of that and working on that as well. I think that's a really interesting way because as you see, like you mentioned, we see it on the hospital and like these patients, they come into the ER, it's just not good medicine. Not only is it not good cost effectiveness, it's just not good medicine to be so reactive and all these ER visits and things. So I think you can make really significant, benefits to the healthcare system by, really being a champion for these types of companies.
And one of the things that as I actually have a question for you is like, yeah, as a physician, as a healthcare professional, like it seems to me the way that the system's set up today, it's basically forcing you to be reactive too, because you're not the way everything's kind of orchestrated, you're having to wait for somebody to show up, right? You're not afforded the time to, kind of proactively be, whether it's, actual, face-to-face interaction or not. That seems really tough. We're starting to see more models that are trying to shift to that, and Crew's a great example of that, right? We're basically bringing value-based care to the cardiac specialty. And so like one of the things that I'm always reading about, because all I do is read about all the trends and the things, right? And then I try to find folks like you and ask you questions. But we have this like, physician burnout, and it's just really broader than just physicians, a healthcare professional burnout, right? And it's one of those things, going back to what I said earlier, that kind of influences where we look. I think we practice a high level of medicine. I also feel like the average healthcare professional is asked to do way more than practice medicine, which is what that individual has expressed an interest in doing, right?
Sure.
All this other stuff. And so I'm curious as to, how you might see things develop over time, or if you're hopeful that something will change. Because that when I read the trends that are in place around burnout, it scares the heck out of me.
Yeah.
And I'm like, and so it's become something that I'm always thinking about when we're evaluating something. I'm like, okay, is this going to take an administrative or logistical or, fill in the blank with some other like business action item off of the physician or the healthcare provider's plate and allow them to focus more time doing, what they theoretically want to be doing, right? What they spent, years getting licensed and licensed for. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really interesting point that, in the old days and kind of the golden years of medicine, it was just practicing medicine and not much else. And now with it's funny, like the EMR has been kind of this great advancement, but also this great curse in some ways, because it's, as I'm sure you're aware, the level of documentation these days is just through the roof. So I mean, that's just one small example of like innovations that help cut down documentation or make it more efficient. And then I think a lot of the, the solutions you're talking about were helping with the workflow, helping take necessary but burdensome tasks off of physicians and helping them, focus more on the patient and things like that. I think, I mean, I think that's a huge contributor to burnout. I mean, obviously there's burnout's a multifactorial process these days, but yeah, certainly I mean, that just, how it is. I'm sure you have mundane tasks you have to do at your job. Like when you have to do so many mundane tasks that are so repetitive over and over again, it just unfortunately that on top of the things you like doing drain your energy. And so it's just only natural that I think that's that's what's going to happen with a lot of people.
And so it's funny you say it, like, because I was putting it exactly through that lens. Like, I was like, how do I think about my job? And there's actually mundane tasks related to my job that I love doing because they're very much what I'm interested in.
Mm-hmm.
I could do those, couldn't do them all day long, but those, there's some sort of joy that comes out of them. And then there's stuff that's not related to investing or, kind of helping our portfolio businesses grow that like, I'm like, why? This wasn't in the job description. Like,
yeah. No, that is very frequently, I think, especially in residency, when you're like, you go to med school and you study science all these years and you're like, wait, I have to do, in addition to all this, I like clinical work, I have to do all of this as well. And it's kind of like an eye-opening thing, like that first year of residency. So, but yeah, no, we're grateful. There's people like you out there helping bring these solutions forward. Cause I think it will help. I think we have to do something. And so I think we can't just keep operating at the status quo. There's gotta be, unfortunately, I mean, I think it provides a lot of room for innovation. It provides a lot of room for, companies to do innovative things and really make a difference.
One of the things that's caught my eye, like, because there's like the clinical workflow stuff and like there's transcription things. And those, I imagine those are helpful once they've been adopted, right? There's always that kind of like hump you gotta get over. Of
Yeah.
Like, I hate when I have to get a new cell phone. But I wouldn't call them like, sea changes or like major like seismic shifts. Something that's starting to crop up that's like really interesting to me is kind of rethinking payment models, specifically around, cutting insurance, like the, traditional insurance out of it. Right. And you see, I don't know if you've come across a lot of these, but like direct primary care.
Yeah.
Has gotten popular. And I know a few physicians that are operating with those models, and it's great, right? It completely kind of reshifts the balance of, to use your words, mundane tasking versus like, why did they bother going through everything you have to go through to get licensed, right? Back towards being able to focus on patient care and practicing medicine. And so I'm curious. I haven't seen a lot of that outside of primary care yet, right? Could you do that in a specialty? Like, I don't know like how, but I think because there's so many folks there's a lot of interested parties in figuring out more efficient models, right? And so that's something that I'd be curious to see, is if that model that seems to be working, at least for the doctors and for the patients, right? Those that I know that are on as a consumer of direct primary care, they love it. And so it seems to be working for them. And so it's like, can you find other situations like that to kind of really change the paradigm? That type of stuff excites me.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. I mean, I think I've heard of examples. I mean, there's obviously like, the cosmetic surgery, plastic surgery that's been doing that kind of stuff for a long time. But I think even within that, there's, I think if it's a specialty that has to be very hospital based, like a great example would be like interventional cardiology, where they have, putting stents in patients with heart attacks where they're dependent on an ER. But if you're someone like a hand surgeon where you do a lot of outpatient procedures, you probably could. I don't know all the complexities of billing for hand surgery because I don't do hand surgery, but I just think of that's something that's, lower acuity, patients go home the same day. And we have a lot of those kind of cases in interventional radiology too. So I've heard of, I don't know if I've heard of anyone doing just cutting insurance out, but I've heard of there are some procedures like vein vein procedures, now that I think of it, where they're lower acuity. Patients kind of either refer themselves or the doctors do a great job of kind of marketing themselves. And so there's a lot more of that. And the physicians I've heard of on different podcasts and read about that do that, they're very satisfied with it for a lot of the same reasons you mentioned in primary care. They're doing procedures all day. They're focused on patient care. They don't have to worry about fighting with insurance companies or figuring out things are going to get paid. It's a very simple transaction in a way.
One of the areas that to me has been a hotbed for kind of rethinking payment models is self-insured employers, right? So
Mm-hmm.
really large corporations, right, where they're on the hook for their costs anyways, right? Nobody's actually providing them insurance other than maybe a reinsurer, but they're on the hook for everything they're spending. And so that's been, the last like decade, that's been an awesome sandbox to try out like a lot of these new kind of concepts around disease management.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that's where I've seen some of these payment models start to crop up, because you can deal with an organization, right, that has enough of a population that's centered, right, and you can deal with them directly, and they're interested
Mm-hmm.
in it because for them, one of the top expense items on their P&L is healthcare,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's not what they do, right? Coca-Cola is not in the healthcare business, but guarantee it's a big line item for them.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
and so they're actually, those folks will play ball on trying out new stuff, and it's been cool to see the things that have come out of that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That's really interesting. I'm curious, as we're kind of getting towards the end here, just kind of your general advice as an investor to like when someone pitches to you, like what do you look for? Like, I guess do you focus more on, I know a lot of investors say they focus more on the jockey per se, or, to use the horse racing analogy, or the CEO or the founders. I guess, how do you look at things? How do you kind of break down a pitch, and any, I guess, pro tips you have on that?
Yeah, I think the first thing I'd say is, do the homework to make sure that whoever you're going to for money is a good fit for what your business is. And that could be in a variety of ways, right?
Hmm.
That could be like, don't like, I would not be the person to come to talk about cryptocurrency. Um, you could have the best idea in the world, and it's gonna go zoom right over my head.
Right.
Um, and so that's, make sure your audience is somebody that's going to be able to like one, understand the value, or at least be able to ask the right questions to
Right.
understand the value. um, and then the other thing is like the fit for the capital and the business model, like I was talking about earlier, right? Make sure before you go spend the time and the effort trying to raise money, make sure that you've got a business model that where truly capital is the limiting variable, because it's a lot of times it's not. And uh, that's that I think, and it's also a question of when do you raise.
Hmm.
That I think, if it's probably selling against myself a little bit, but I went out and started a business right now. My goal would be to get the business as far along as possible to being a true business, right? For me, like, until a business has shown that it has the unit economics to keep itself running without, transfusions of cash, you haven't fully escaped, the gravitational pull that kills most businesses.
Hmm.
Like, get as close to that as you can, right? Because the surer I can be that um, that there is absolutely a business here, that that then that makes me a lot more confident that at least I'm not looking at a loss, right?
Sure.
Right now, that starts to answer questions, because people talk about, oh, market size of the market. Okay, size of the market matters. Also depends on how we don't base our investment strategy around moonshots. Um,
Hmm.
for anybody that's a baseball person, right? We play Billy Martin baseball as opposed to Billy Bean. We're fine hitting doubles and bunting a guy over to third. We're not just up there swinging for homers. And so our approach, like, I the market needs to be big enough for us to grow a nice business and then sell it to somebody that could also grow it, but it doesn't have to be like a $50 billion market.
Sure.
There's that's not a thing. But going back to, the right time and who you're talking to, the closer you are to there being no doubt that this is a business, right?
Hmm.
That going to be able to sustain itself, you've removed a lot of risk, right? And investing, when done right, is a balance of risk and reward, right?
Right.
Appropriately assessing the risk you're taking on and appropriately making sure you're sizing your upside to what that risk is. That's it, right? It doesn't matter whether you're doing debt or equity or buying stocks in the market. Like, that's what investing is. And so the further along you can move yourself off the risk, on the risk spectrum to safety, then better opportunity you have, right? Regardless of who you're talking to. And by the way, the value of your business goes up when you do that. And that means you'll raise money at a higher valuation because there's less risk involved. So, I think, sometimes people get, a little caught up. So let me say this. When somebody's coming to me and they're talking about, I focus on healthcare, it's all I do. I am not a healthcare expert. In fact, you meet one, let me know. Like, way too much stuff going on in my opinion, for somebody to be truly expert on the whole thing.
Yeah.
In the first pitch, right? A lot of people spend a lot of time talking about the what they're doing and how they're doing it.
Hmm.
I need to really understand the problem, right? Who it impacts, how it impacts them, the cost of the impact, why this is the thing that they have to solve, why it creates a lot of value for them when they solve it. That's really important. And then understanding kind of what you're doing and how it's different from how that, what you're doing as a solution and how that's different from how it's being solved or addressed
Hmm.
today. Those are really important. But to be honest, like, I don't necessarily need to know how the sausage is getting made,
Yeah.
especially in the first meeting, because I'm not going to have the context to be able to understand in significant detail what I need to know at that point, right? To be able to say, oh, I think that's baloney. Like,
Right. Right.
I always give kind of the benefit of the doubt, right? If there's a really, really strong problem and I can see that the person really understands all the nuance around the problem, and then I understand how the solution is simple, like, simple is trump card, right? Doesn't
Hmm.
mean that the solution itself is actually simple, but if it can be explained simply,
Hmm.
then I know that, okay, if I can explain, if some it can be explained to me in the first time I'm hearing about it, and it gets my head going up and down, like, okay, that makes logical sense. I know that it should be fairly easy for somebody that actually understands, deeply, or is dealing with that problem. They're definitely going to have their head going up and down, right?
Sure.
If it takes 5 minutes to describe, what you're doing or why it's valuable, that creates a little bit of concern as to, like, okay, maybe it is creating a lot of value, but we got to figure out a better way of talking about it so that, when you get somebody to open the email or they just read the subject line of your email, right, you can get them to click on it and open it, right? Because that's,
Sure.
especially in this day and age, it's tough to get more than that on the sales front. But yeah, so I think having a really crisp understanding of the problem, the solution is really key. And people talk about the market, right? I'm more interested in how somebody's segmented their market and how thoroughly they understand their market versus how big it is, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
If you had some solution for the post-acute market, you said, oh, the post-acute market's X big, I'd be like, okay, I bet it is. I was like, maybe I'll go look at that later. But who are you selling to within the post-acute market?
Hmm.
Oh, okay, you're selling into hospice, home health, and SNFs. Okay, what kind of SNFs? Like,
Yeah.
what's the profile of that SNF? Or you're selling into physician practice? Okay, specialist, not specialist, independent, employed.
Hmm.
How many physicians? A couple, 50, like,
Right.
that type of thing, right? Where I can see, oh wow, okay, they really understand who they're looking for, because it's a heck of a lot easier to find the people you need to be talking to if you know who you're looking for. That's I'll stop there. I could go on for a while on that, but yeah,
No, that makes a lot of sense because I think you hear people try to kind of fast talk and get into the weeds on the technology and like how it's so fancy and it's going to do this and do that, and that's great. And if I've even seen as a clinician, just because a clinician likes it, it's got to fit into the whole ecosystem. It's got to fit into exactly what you're talking about, like the right market. It's got to solve the right problem in the right way, in a way that's not too cumbersome or confusing, and be adoptable as well. We've all seen these promising healthcare technologies that come out, and they, either hospitals don't use them, or clinicians don't use them, or both. And it's all about, it's much more complicated than, oh, it's a cool piece of technology and people like it.
Yeah, I think the thing I always try to think about is like, because you're 100% right. The number of like software solutions or that 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 I've listened to a pitch on where I'm like, wow, that's great. How many customers do you have? Oh, not that many. Or, oh, we've got some signed, but they haven't implemented yet.
Mm,
I have like the count of the body count for, lack of adoption really high.
yeah, I bet.
It makes sense. Like if somebody came into my office and said, "Hey, guess what? You're not allowed to use the internet anymore. You're going to use this thing." Um, right? And that's the thing that you live on,
Right.
right? Or my email, right? Oh, instead of that, we're going to do this thing. You have to relearn everything. Oh, I'm gonna be fighting that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm like, no, no, no. Like my email, like, is it perfect? No, but like I do my job today, and
Yeah.
I show up here and I leave here, and it works.
Right. Right.
Don't go moving my cheese.
Yeah.
Uh, and so yeah, that's especially in the healthcare IT side. And then people like, yeah, the other thing I always that has been pitched a lot to me is um, stuff around AI on clinical decision support and stuff like that. And
Hmm.
I feel like there's definitely that's going to be adopted in ways. But one of the things that's always tough is like, okay, but how and why and how many other things? Somebody said this to me the other day. They're like, are you trying to sell something in a hospital system? Right. And you think you're selling into this, right? And this is just this one little cog. What you don't see is that one little cog is tied to like 30 other activities within that hospital system.
Hmm.
And if that cog gets pulled out, requires rewiring up 30 things, right? And so, yeah, not to mention you're moving the cheese for 30 different, people within that organization. The IT department's like, great. Well, so anyways.
No, 100%. I mean, I think, it's funny you mentioned AI. That's such a hot thing right now. And, there's, especially in my field of radiology, I think I've heard someone there's like 600 AI companies out there at some point or something like that. And we're certainly not going to have 600 AI companies, 10 years from now. I'm curious, is that, kind of looking, ahead into the future a little bit? I realize you don't have a crystal ball, but I guess from what you're seeing, like, are you guys looking much at AI type companies? Is that something that's like playing, or is that more, do you think that's more of kind of people kind of that's like a buzzword people are attaching more so right now? Or I guess, what are your thoughts on that?
There's definitely a lot of that, like, and then AI, and it's like, what?
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but I'll tell you, I don't have an artificial intelligence background, right? So it's hard for me to call, bologna sandwich on something that somebody's telling me. Where I know it's going to have an impact is more in a like an operational type manner, right? Where
Hmm.
people are adopting it to accomplish something else. And that's what like that tends to be the areas where like I'd be keen on investing in it. Is it's not that like the product is the AI, right? That seems like this arms race where you're constantly trying to like, tune your algorithm like beyond the other five people that are doing the same thing. I'm more interested, again, like gets back to what I said. I have a very strong belief that like at its core, healthcare is human, and that without that human piece, anyways, only so much can be accomplished,
Right,
right?
right.
The number of apps that are out there or whatever on people's phones where it's like, oh, well, this is a diabetes app. Well, it's like, yeah, but like you got to get the person that's got diabetes to use it. And why should they? Like, you know, and I have seen the impact of taking a pure software, solution and then wrapping, healthcare providers around it, right? Oh, it's crazy. The level of
Mhm.
engagement goes to the roof because at the end of the day, like I don't trust, I don't trust an app with my health. Like,
Right.
but if Dr. Cooper is telling me that this app is going to help me and he's engaging with the app too, like, okay, now I put some because my trust lies with the individual that's spent X many years getting licensed and is the person that's been treating me with whatever I'm dealing with
Sure.
for X many years and so I think AI for me I'm looking at it a lot as like an enabling thing, right? It's getting used internally. I'm interested in situations like that where they're like, oh well, because we leverage artificial intelligence to do this, we're 50% more efficient than the other group that's doing this, right?
Hmm.
Not, and they're using something off the shelf, right? It's not some proprietary thing that they're having to dump tons of money into to um, keep the lights on.
Yeah. Yeah. That definitely makes sense. Well, last thing as we wrap up here, I ask every guest this: when you're not doing investing and working with health tech companies, how do you find that balance if there is any in this world today?
Yeah, no, I'm big on balance. No, I've got a wife and two kids, and a dog, and my ideal weekend is, keeps me within about 40 feet of my grill, um,
Nice.
and a couple of cold ones, and
Nice.
just hanging out. Now we got football season coming up, right? So
Yeah.
we're entering prime grilling season. So I've been making sure that, doing all my preseason workouts, making sure that I show up ready to anyways, joking. But that's what I like doing. I love hanging out with my family and I'll get out on the golf course occasionally too.
Nice. Nice. Awesome. Well, last thing here is that, I want to make sure people can, we'll link it in the description, but just so they can hear it, where can people, connect with you and BIP Ventures and learn more?
Yeah. So our website is BIP, P as in Paul, ventures.vc. And then that's generally speaking the best way to get to us, right? And then yeah, and we're in Atlanta and we spent a lot of time outside of Atlanta too. I was just in Minneapolis last week and Nashville the week before. But yeah, we'll be at Venture Atlanta for sure. I don't know if
Nice.
you're going to that, but you should. It's definitely it's turned into like the premier kind of event for the whole Southeast. That
Nice.
has done a great job of really making Atlanta a destination. So
Very cool. Very cool. Well, Austin, thank you so much for your time. This was a really interesting conversation.
yeah, likewise. Appreciate you having me on.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the DaVinci Hour podcast, presented by DaVinci Academy. Please be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow the podcast on your podcast platform of choice to catch the latest episodes. Please leave a comment or a review and share it with a friend. Lastly, you can find all of our podcasts, video courses, and books on our website, dviacademy.com. Thank you for listening.